Faster, we're losing her!
The oxygen mask pressed against Ewan's face like a suffocating hand, but he kept crawling through the collapsed tunnel. Behind him, 17-year-old Jimmy Torres wheezed through damaged lungs, his leg bent at an angle that made Ewan's stomach turn. The kid had been down here for 6 hours already when the secondary collapse trapped them both. "I can't make it," Jimmy gasped, his voice barely audible through the dust-thick air. Ewan grabbed the boy's jacket and pulled him forward another few feet. "You're making it. Your mom's waiting up there." The beam from Ewan's headlamp cut through the darkness, revealing the narrow gap they'd have to squeeze through to reach the main shaft. Fresh air whistled through it, salvation just 20 yards away. But Jimmy's injured leg wouldn't bend enough to fit. "Leave me," Jimmy whispered. "Not happening." Ewan pulled out his emergency knife and started cutting away debris from the gap, his hands bleeding from the sharp coal fragments. 40 minutes later, they emerged into the main tunnel where the rescue team waited. Jimmy was rushed to an ambulance while the crew patted Ewan on the back, calling him a hero. He barely heard them. All he could think about was getting home to Natalie, holding her close, and forgetting this nightmare. But when he woke up 2 days later in the hospital, Natalie wasn't there. "She went to get coffee," the nurse said when Ewan asked. "She'll be right back." That was at 10 in the morning. Natalie didn't return until 4 in the afternoon, her phone buzzing constantly in her purse. She kissed his forehead with lips that tasted like mint gum and guilt. "I was so worried," she said, but her eyes kept darting to her phone screen. "Where were you yesterday?" Ewan asked. "Yesterday? I was here. Don't you remember?" He didn't remember her being there at all. The nurse had told him his wife visited briefly on the first day, then left after 20 minutes. But arguing seemed pointless when his head still felt like it was packed with coal dust. Dean walked in carrying a bouquet of gas station flowers and a bag of beef jerky. "Look who's finally awake. Heard you saved that Torres kid. His whole family's been praying for you." "It's nothing," Ewan said. "Nothing?" Dean shook his head. "Man, you crawled into a death trap to pull out someone else's son. That's everything." Natalie's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and stepped into the hallway to answer it. Through the open door, Ewan could hear her talking in the hushed, intimate tone she usually reserved for him. "That's work," she explained when she came back. "They're planning some big ceremony for the mine rescue. Corporate wants to make it a media thing." The ceremony took place the following week at the community center. Ewan sat on stage in his only good suit, feeling like a fraud while various officials praised his heroism. The mayor gave a speech. The mine superintendent presented him with a plaque. Then Natalie's boss, some wellness coach named Caleb Holt, took the microphone. "Courage isn't just about physical bravery," Caleb said, his voice smooth as snake oil. "It's about honesty, integrity, the willingness to do what's right, even when no one's watching." As he spoke, Caleb moved around the stage with practiced ease, his expensive suit and perfect smile out of place in the working-class crowd. When he finished his speech, he walked over to Natalie and placed his hand on her lower back, fingers lingering just a moment too long. Ewan caught the gesture, but Natalie didn't pull away. After the ceremony, people shook Ewan's hand and bought him drinks at Murphy's bar. He smiled and accepted their congratulations while watching Natalie text on her phone in the corner booth. Every few minutes, she'd look up and catch his eye, offering a guilty smile before returning to her screen. At midnight, as they walked to their truck, Ewan's phone chimed with an airdrop notification from an unknown sender. He almost ignored it, but curiosity won. The file contained a short video clip time-stamped 3 days earlier, while he'd been unconscious in the hospital. The footage showed his own driveway. Natalie's car pulled in, followed by a silver BMW. Caleb got out of the BMW, walked to Natalie's car, and pulled her into an embrace that lasted far too long for a business relationship. Their bodies pressed together. Her hand caressed his cheek. They kissed like lovers who'd been apart for months. Ewan watched the clip 3 times before deleting it, his hands shaking with more than just exhaustion. The next morning, Natalie hummed while making coffee, her mood lighter than it had been in weeks. "Sleep well?" she asked. "Like the dead," Ewan replied. Over the following days, he began paying attention to details he'd previously ignored. Natalie's phone face down on the table during dinner, her sudden interest in working late, the new underwear that appeared in her drawer, the way she'd started showering immediately after coming home from work. A week later, while Natalie was at her book club, Ewan installed a hidden recording app on her laptop using credentials she'd never bothered to change. He felt sick doing it, but the video had planted a seed of suspicion that grew stronger each day. The recordings revealed everything. "I can't keep pretending," Natalie's voice said through his earbuds as he sat in his truck outside the mine. "Ewan's a good man, but he's not going anywhere. He'll be crawling through coal shafts until the day he dies." "We just need to be patient," Caleb's voice replied. "Once Mira gets the wellness center approved, we'll have enough to start over somewhere else. Clean slate." "I love you," Natalie said. "I love you too. Just remember, no more meeting at your place. Too risky." Ewan sat in the parking lot until his shift started, then spent 8 hours underground trying to forget what he'd heard. But the words followed him through every tunnel, echoing off the coal-stained walls like a curse. That evening, he told Natalie he'd picked up an extra night shift. "More money's always good," she said, not looking up from her phone. "I'll probably stay late at the office anyway. Big presentation tomorrow." Instead of going to work, Ewan parked behind the old grain elevator with a clear view of their house. At 8:30, the silver BMW pulled into his driveway. Through his binoculars, he watched Caleb walk to the front door like he owned the place. Natalie answered, wearing a dress Ewan had never seen before. He took pictures with his phone, hands steady despite the rage building in his chest. At 10:15, they came out onto the front porch. Caleb pressed Natalie against the doorframe and kissed her neck while she laughed. "Still smells like diesel and dust in there," she said, loud enough for the sound to carry across the yard. "I can't wait to get out of this place." "Few more months," Caleb replied. "Then we'll be living in the city like civilized people." They kissed again before Caleb got in his car and drove away. Natalie watched from the porch until his taillights disappeared, then went back inside. 10 minutes later, Ewan's phone buzzed with a text. "Working late tonight? Don't wait up. Love you." He typed back, "Love you too." The next week, Ewan started his real investigation. He used his lunch breaks to research Caleb's background, discovering a pattern of failed businesses and questionable partnerships. The Wellness Center project was funded through a shell company registered in Delaware. Public records showed liens against Caleb's previous ventures. His business partner, Mira, had a criminal record for embezzlement in Ohio. Most interesting was the land deal for the Wellness Center. The property had been purchased through the same shell company for half its appraised value from a seller who happened to be the mayor's brother-in-law. The whole thing stank of corruption. Ewan copied everything to a secure folder on his laptop, then began planning his response. The opportunity came when Dean's sister Kelly, who waitressed at the upscale restaurant across town, mentioned finding a flash drive in the parking lot after cleaning up from a private party. "Some guy in a fancy suit dropped it," she said. "Had a bunch of videos on it. Weird stuff. I was going to throw it away, but thought maybe someone would want it back." Ewan volunteered to return it, knowing exactly whose suit Kelly had described. The flash drive contained dozens of video files, each labeled with women's names. The content ranged from secretly recorded intimate encounters to what appeared to be blackmail material. Natalie appeared in 6 different files, including one where she mocked Ewan's rescue of Jimmy Torres. "He thinks he's some kind of hero," she laughed in the video. "If only he knew how pathetic he looks crawling around in the dirt like an animal." In another file, she and Caleb discussed their exit strategy. "Once this wellness center deal goes through, we'll have enough to disappear," Caleb said. "Your husband will never find us." "Good," Natalie replied. "I'm tired of pretending to love him. Sometimes I wish he'd just disappear down one of those mine shafts and never come back." Ewan watched each video twice, memorizing every word, every gesture, every laugh at his expense. By the time he finished, his hands had stopped shaking. His breathing had steadied. The hurt had crystallized into something harder and more focused. He began making copies. Terry Ashcombe had supervised the mine for 15 years, but everyone knew he was on his way out. The company was downsizing, automation was replacing workers, and Terry was too old to retrain for a new career. He'd been taking small bribes from equipment vendors for months, thinking no one noticed. But Ewan had noticed everything. "I need a favor," Ewan said, cornering Terry in the equipment shed after their shift ended. "What kind of favor?" Ewan pulled out his phone and showed Terry a photo of him accepting cash from a drill bit salesman. "The kind where you help me with a training exercise and I forget about your side income." Terry's face went pale. "That's not what it looks like. It looks like you're taking kickbacks from vendors while the company's laying off workers. But I'm not interested in causing trouble for a fellow miner. I just need to borrow the old training tunnel for a few hours next weekend. Off the books." "What for?" "Emergency response drill. Need to test some new equipment in realistic conditions." Terry agreed because he had no choice. The following Monday, Ewan anonymously submitted a detailed report to the IRS regarding Caleb's tax evasion schemes, complete with supporting documentation from the flash drive. He also sent a package to the corporate ethics hotline for Natalie's company, including evidence of the fraudulent wellness center deal and Caleb's history of business fraud. Then he created a fake email account and sent Natalie a message that appeared to come from her company's HR department. Miss Greaves, please report to the Pinecrest Retreat Center this Saturday at 2 p.m. for an emergency strategy session regarding the Wellness Center project. Attendance is mandatory. Mr. Holt has been notified separately. The Pinecrest Retreat Center was an abandoned corporate training facility 20 miles outside town. Ewan had discovered it during his research into the company's local properties. It had been closed for 2 years, but still had working electricity and phone service. On Friday night, Ewan told Natalie he'd be spending the weekend at Dean's cabin, helping with repairs. That's nice, she said absently, focused on her laptop screen. I have to work Saturday anyway, some emergency meeting. Rough break. What time? 2 o'clock. Hopefully won't take long. Saturday morning, Ewan arrived at the retreat center at dawn. He spent 3 hours setting up wireless cameras in strategic locations, testing the backup generator, and preparing the old training rooms. The facility's isolation was perfect. No neighbors, no traffic, no chance of interruption. At 1:30, he positioned his truck behind a stand of pine trees with a clear view of the parking area and waited. Natalie's car arrived first, followed 5 minutes later by Caleb's BMW. They met in the parking lot, embracing and kissing before walking to the main building together. Ewan watched them try the locked front door, then circle around to find an unlocked side entrance he'd prepared. Once they were inside, he drove around to block the main driveway with his truck. The building's PA system still worked. Ewan's voice echoed through the empty hallways as he spoke into the wireless microphone from the security office. Welcome to your performance review. He could see them on the security monitors, standing frozen in the main conference room. Ewan? Natalie called out. Is that you? 6 months, Ewan continued through the speakers. 6 months of planning your escape while I risked my life underground. 6 months of laughing about the man who saved Jimmy Torres while you counted stolen money. Caleb grabbed Natalie's hand and pulled her toward the exit, but Ewan had already locked the electronic doors from the security console. Let us out! Caleb shouted at the cameras. This is kidnapping! This is a conversation, Ewan replied. One that's long overdue. He left the security office and walked to the conference room, carrying a laptop bag and a portable speaker. When he entered, Natalie rushed toward him. Ewan, thank God, this whole thing is a misunderstanding. Someone's been... Sit down. Something in his voice stopped her mid-sentence. She sat in one of the conference chairs while Caleb remained standing, his face flushed with indignation. You can't hold us here, Caleb said. I have connections. I'll have you arrested. Ewan opened his laptop and connected it to the speaker. Let's talk about connections. He played the first audio file, Natalie describing her plan to leave him once the wellness center deal was complete. Her voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. I'm tired of pretending to love him. Sometimes I wish he'd just disappear down one of those mine shafts and never come back. Natalie's face went white. That's not... You're taking it out of context. Here's more context, Ewan said, playing another file where she called him pathetic and mocked his rescue of Jimmy Torres. Caleb tried to move toward the door, but Ewan stepped into his path. We're not finished. You're insane, Caleb said. You can't do this to us. Can't do what? Play recordings of your own words? Show evidence of your fraud? Ewan pulled out a thick folder and dropped it on the conference table. IRS case number 47291, filed Monday morning with complete documentation of your tax evasion schemes. Caleb's confidence cracked. You don't know what you're talking about. Mira's been arrested, Ewan continued. Embezzlement charges. Turns out she's been skimming from client accounts for years. The FBI found your joint bank accounts when they searched her office. That was a lie, but Caleb didn't know it. His face went from red to gray. As of yesterday, your business licenses have been suspended pending investigation. Your company's assets are frozen. The wellness center deal is dead. Ewan turned to Natalie. Your employer received a detailed report about your involvement with Caleb's fraudulent activities. They're conducting their own investigation. I didn't know about any fraud, Natalie whispered. But you knew about the flash drive. You knew about the other women. You knew Caleb was recording them without consent, and you didn't care as long as you got your cut. He played another audio file, a conversation where Natalie and Caleb discussed blackmailing one of his previous victims. That's enough, Caleb said. lunging toward the laptop. Ewan caught his wrist and twisted his arm behind his back, forcing him face down onto the conference table. The move was instinctive, learned from years of handling equipment underground and dealing with drunk minors at Murphy's bar. 6 months of planning, Ewan said, applying pressure until Caleb stopped struggling. You thought you were so clever. Corporate wellness, clean money, new life in the city. He released Caleb and stepped back. But you never understood the most important thing about coal mining. What's that? Caleb gasped, rubbing his arm. We know how to work in the dark. Ewan played one final audio file, a recording of Caleb describing his plan to frame Ewan for domestic violence if he ever discovered the affair. We'll make it look like he snapped, Caleb's voice said through the speakers. Small-town miner, hero complex, probably has PTSD from the rescue. Perfect setup for a restraining order. Natalie started crying, but the tears looked more like frustration than remorse. Let us go, she said. We'll leave town. You'll never see us again. You're right about one thing, Ewan replied. I'll never see you again. He walked to the window and pointed outside. In the parking lot sat a news van from the local television station. I called them 20 minutes ago. Anonymous tip about a major corruption story involving the Wellness Center project. They're very interested in interviewing the key players. Caleb ran to the window. You bastard. There's a back exit that leads to the old logging road, Ewan said. You can probably sneak out that way if you hurry. Of course, your car will still be here when the reporters start asking questions. He gathered his laptop and folder, then paused at the door. One more thing, Natalie. I sent a package to your father yesterday. USB drive with highlights from your greatest hits, including the recording where you called him a mining monkey who never understood real success. Her face crumpled. You didn't. Your dad called this morning. He wants his house key back. Said to tell you that you're no daughter of his. Ewan left them in the conference room and walked out to his truck. As he drove away, he could see them arguing through the window, their gestures becoming more frantic as the news van's crew began setting up equipment. 3 days later, the story broke across local media. Corporate fraud, embezzlement, political corruption. Everything Ewan had documented became public record. The Wellness Center project collapsed. The mayor's brother-in-law was arrested. Caleb disappeared before charges could be filed, but his business partner Mira was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. Natalie lost her job and her apartment. Her company's legal team made it clear she was being investigated for conspiracy and fraud. She tried calling Ewan repeatedly, but he'd blocked her number. The final confrontation came on a Thursday evening as Ewan finished his shift. Natalie was waiting by his truck in the mine parking lot, looking like she hadn't slept in days. We need to talk, she said. Nothing to talk about. I made mistakes, but we can work through this. We had something real. Ewan unlocked his truck and threw his equipment bag in the back. What we had was real. What you had with Caleb was performance art. I never meant for things to go this far. You meant every word. I have the recordings to prove it. She grabbed his arm as he opened the driver's door. Please, I love you. He looked at her hand on his sleeve, then met her eyes. You love the idea of having someone to fall back on. That's not the same thing. I'll do anything to fix this. You can't fix betrayal, Natalie. You can only live with the consequences. He got in his truck and drove away, leaving her standing alone in the parking lot under the harsh glare of the security lights. A week later, Dean found Ewan at Murphy's bar, nursing a beer and staring at the television. Heard from Natalie lately? Dean asked. She moved back with her sister in Pittsburgh, or trying to anyway. Turns out her sister saw the news reports. Rough. She made her choices. Dean ordered a beer and sat down. Speaking of choices, there's something I need to tell you. Remember that flash drive Kelly found? I knew it was Caleb's from the start. I was the one who sent you that video of him and Natalie. Ewan turned to look at his friend. Why? Because you deserve to know the truth, and because Jimmy Torres is my nephew. Your nephew? My sister's boy. Different last name, but same family. When Natalie was talking about wishing you'd disappear in that mine shaft, she was talking about the man who saved my family. They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the news coverage of another political scandal in the state capitol. What happens now? Dean asked. Now we go back to work, mine coal, live our lives. That's it? That's everything. The following month, Ewan received a letter from Jimmy Torres, now recovered and back in school. The kid wanted to study engineering, inspired by Ewan's rescue work. He'd received a scholarship from a mining industry foundation and would be starting college in the fall. I want to build better safety systems, Jimmy wrote. So other people don't have to risk their lives the way you risked yours for me. Ewan folded the letter and put it in his wallet next to his mining certification card. That evening, he drove out to the old retreat center where everything had unraveled. The building was still abandoned, windows dark, parking lot empty except for weeds growing through the asphalt cracks. Someone had spray-painted "condemned" across the front door. He sat in his truck for a while, thinking about choices and consequences, about the difference between justice and revenge, about the weight of secrets and the cost of truth. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I know what you did. We need to meet." Ewan deleted the message without responding. Whatever came next, he'd handle it the same way he'd handled everything else. One step at a time, working in the dark, guided by the knowledge that some things were worth the risk. He started his truck and drove home through the quiet streets of Ravens Hollow, past the closed storefronts and empty lots where progress had promised so much and delivered so little. The mine still operated, though with fewer workers each year. The town still struggled, though with less hope each season. But Ewan had learned something valuable in the depths of the tunnels and the darkness of betrayal. Survival wasn't about avoiding collapse. It was about knowing which walls to trust and which ones to bring down yourself. The next morning brought news that Caleb's body had been found in a hotel room 3 states away, apparently from a drug overdose. The investigation revealed debts to dangerous people and a history of borrowing money he couldn't repay. His death barely rated a paragraph in the local newspaper. Natalie called that afternoon, crying about Caleb and begging Ewan to take her back. He listened for exactly 60 seconds, then hung up and blocked her number permanently. 3 months later, she stopped trying to contact him. 6 months later, Dean got married to Kelly, the waitress who'd found the flash drive. Ewan served as best man, giving a toast about loyalty and truth that made half the wedding party tear up. A year later, the mine finally closed for good, automated out of existence by machines that could work deeper and longer than any human crew. Ewan used his severance pay and the settlement from Jimmy Torres's insurance claim to buy a small equipment repair shop on the edge of town. He specialized in heavy machinery, excavators, bulldozers, industrial generators. The work was similar to mining but above ground, fixing things instead of digging them up. The shop did well enough to keep him comfortable, and the customers appreciated his honest pricing and reliable service. Sometimes, late at night when he was working alone in the shop, Ewan would think about the choices that had brought him to this point. The marriage that had died in corporate conference rooms and anonymous hotel beds. The friendship that had survived secrets and revenge. The rescue that had started everything and the recordings that had ended it. He'd made peace with most of it. But one thing still bothered him. The anonymous texter never revealed themselves. For months, Ewan expected another message, another threat, another complication. But nothing came. Eventually, he decided it had probably been Natalie herself, making one last desperate attempt at manipulation. That theory lasted until Dean stopped by the shop one evening with a 6-pack of beer and a confession. "I need to tell you something," Dean said, looking uncomfortable. "About that text you got. The 'I know what you did' message." Ewan set down his wrench and wiped his hands on a shop rag. "That was you? Hell no. But I know who it was." Dean opened 2 beers and handed one to Ewan. "Terry Ashcombe." "Terry? Why?" "He figured out you used him for more than just a training drill. Started putting pieces together after the news broke about Caleb and the wellness center. Realized you'd played him." "What did he want?" "Money, at first. Then he got scared when Caleb turned up dead. Thought maybe you were more dangerous than he'd realized." Ewan laughed despite himself. "He thought I killed Caleb?" Terry's not the brightest bulb, but when the cops released the autopsy report showing it was an overdose, he relaxed. Still worried about the other stuff, though. "What other stuff?" "The fact that he helped you kidnap your wife and her boyfriend. Even if it was only for a few hours, even if nobody got hurt, it's still a federal crime." They stood in the shop's fluorescent lighting, surrounded by the smell of motor oil and metal shavings, while Ewan processed this information. "Where's Terry now?" "Moved to Florida. Got a job with his brother-in-law's construction company. Sends me Christmas cards with pictures of palm trees and promises never to come back north." "Good for him. You're not worried he'll talk?" Ewan shook his head. "Terry's got more to lose than I do. He took bribes for years before I ever approached him. Besides, who's he going to tell? Natalie and Caleb were the only witnesses, and one's dead while the other's got her own legal problems to worry about." They finished their beers while watching the sun set over the mountains that surrounded Ravens Hollow. The town looked smaller from the shop's elevation, its remaining lights scattered like stars against the darkening landscape. "Any regrets?" Dean asked. Ewan considered the question seriously. He thought about Jimmy Torres, now in his second year of engineering school, about the other women on Caleb's flash drive who'd been spared further exploitation, about the corruption that had been exposed and the jobs that had been saved when the wellness center scam collapsed. "Ask me in 10 years, he said finally. "Fair enough." Dean left around 9 o'clock, promising to bring Kelly by for dinner over the weekend. Ewan finished the repair job he'd been working on, a hydraulic pump for a local contractor, then locked up the shop and drove home. His house felt different now, emptied of Natalie's presence but not haunted by it. He'd kept her favorite coffee mug in the kitchen cabinet, not out of sentimentality, but because throwing it away seemed like more effort than it was worth. Sometimes he used it without thinking, and it still worked perfectly fine for holding coffee. The bedroom had been harder to adjust to. For months after she left, he'd found himself sleeping on the couch rather than confronting the king-size bed they'd shared for 5 years. Eventually, he'd replaced the mattress and rearranged the furniture, transforming the space into something that felt like his own. Tonight, though, sleep came easily. He'd learned to appreciate the quiet rhythms of a life lived on his own terms, answerable to no one but himself and the customers who trusted him to fix their broken machines. The phone rang at 6 in the morning, jolting him awake with the particular urgency that only comes from unexpected calls before sunrise. "Ewan, it's Sarah Torres, Jimmy's mom." He sat up immediately, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. Jimmy graduated yesterday with highest honors, full scholarship to graduate school. He wanted me to call you." "That's wonderful news. He's designing safety systems now, just like he wrote in that letter. His professor says he's got real talent for it. Says Jimmy might save more lives with his engineering than most people could save with their bare hands." Ewan smiled, remembering the scared kid he'd pulled from the collapsed tunnel. "Tell him I'm proud of him." "I will. But Ewan, I need to tell you something else. About that day in the mine." "What about it?" "Jimmy wasn't supposed to be down there. He'd been skipping his safety training classes, thought he knew better than the instructors. When the collapse happened, he was in that tunnel because he was hiding from his supervisor." Ewan felt a chill run down his spine. "Sarah, if you hadn't gone after him, if you hadn't risked everything to bring him back, my boy would have died because of his own stupid choices. And now he's going to spend his life making sure other people's children come home safe." She was crying now, the sound of it carrying clearly through the phone connection. "You gave me back my son, and he's going to give other mothers back theirs. That's worth more than any medal or ceremony or newspaper story. That's what real heroism looks like." After she hung up, Ewan sat on the edge of his bed for a long time, thinking about chains of consequence and unintended redemption. He'd saved Jimmy Torres because it was the right thing to do, never imagining how that single act would ripple outward through time and circumstance. Later that morning, while he was opening the shop, a familiar silver car pulled into the parking lot. For a moment, his heart jumped before he realized it wasn't Caleb's BMW, but a similar model with Pennsylvania plates. Natalie got out of the passenger side, followed by a man Ewan didn't recognize. She looked older, thinner, her confidence replaced by something more cautious and worn. "Hello, Ewan," she said, approaching the shop's open bay door with careful steps. "Natalie. This is David, my attorney. We need to talk." The lawyer was younger than Ewan had expected, with the nervous energy of someone handling his first major case. He carried a briefcase and wore a suit that had seen better days. "Mr. Greaves, I represent Miss Natalie Hawkins. She's taken back her maiden name in regard to certain property disputes arising from your dissolved marriage." "We were never married," Ewan said. "Common law doesn't apply in this state. Nevertheless, there are questions of joint property, shared assets. Nothing joint about it. Houses in my name, trucks in my name, shops in my name. She can have whatever's left of her stuff if she can remember where she put it." Natalie stepped forward. "It's not about the property, Ewan. It's about what you did to us. The kidnapping, the harassment, the way you destroyed our lives. You destroyed your own lives. I just made sure everyone knew about it. You held us against our will for 3 hours in a comfortable conference room with working bathrooms and complimentary coffee." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Greaves, my client is prepared to forego criminal charges if you agree to certain conditions." "What criminal charges?" Ewan laughed. False imprisonment? Good luck proving that when you have recordings of your client planning to frame me for domestic violence? Natalie's face flushed. Those recordings were obtained illegally. From your own laptop, using passwords you gave me when we lived together. Perfectly legal under state privacy laws. He walked to his workbench and picked up a socket wrench, testing its weight in his hand while he considered his next words. Let me save you both some time, he said finally. Whatever legal theory you're operating under, whatever leverage you think you have, whatever outcome you're hoping for, forget it. You have nothing I want and nothing I fear. We could go to the media, the lawyer said. Tell them about your vigilante justice. Make you look like the villain. Go ahead. Jimmy Torres will be happy to give interviews about the hero who saved his life. The other women on Caleb's flash drive will be thrilled to explain how you helped him exploit them. The IRS will provide detailed statements about the tax fraud you participated in. Ewan set down the wrench and looked directly at Natalie. You want to make this a media story? I'll give them a story they'll never forget. Every sordid detail, every recorded conversation, every piece of evidence I collected about your boyfriend's criminal enterprise. He wasn't a criminal, Natalie said weakly. He died owing money to people who break kneecaps for late payments. His autopsy showed enough cocaine in his system to kill a horse. The FBI found child pornography on his work computer. Ewan watched her face go pale. You really want to tie yourself to that legacy? The lawyer whispered something in Natalie's ear, then cleared his throat again. My client is willing to accept a financial settlement in lieu of pursuing legal action. How much? $50,000. Ewan laughed so hard he had to lean against the workbench for support. $50,000? For what? Pain and suffering, emotional distress, loss of career opportunities. Here's my counteroffer, Ewan said, walking to the shop's front office and returning with a manila envelope. This contains copies of every piece of evidence I gathered about Caleb's activities. Financial records, victim testimonies, communications with known criminals, enough to keep federal prosecutors busy for years. He handed the envelope to the lawyer.
Take this to whoever's paying your fees and explain that pursuing this case will result in every major news outlet in the country learning about your client's involvement with a dead criminal. Then ask yourself if $50,000 is worth destroying what's left of her reputation. The lawyer's confidence evaporated as he flipped through the documents. Natalie grabbed his arm. David, what does it say? We should go, he replied, closing the envelope quickly. That's the smartest thing anyone said all morning, Ewan agreed. As they walked back to their car, Natalie turned around one last time. I did love you, she said. At the beginning, anyway. I know, Ewan replied. That's what made the rest of it hurt so much. She got in the car without another word. Through the windshield, Ewan could see her crying as they drove away. But he felt nothing more than mild curiosity about where she'd go next and whether she'd learned anything from the experience. Probably not, he decided. Some people were just wired for self-destruction. The rest of the day passed quietly. A farmer brought in a broken cultivator. A contractor needed welding work on a damaged excavator bucket. Normal problems with straightforward solutions. The kind of work Ewan had come to appreciate for its honesty and clarity. Around 5 o'clock, Dean stopped by with news from town. Heard Natalie was here today. Word travels fast. Murphy's Bar has better intelligence than the CIA. What did she want? Money, revenge. Some combination of both. She got either one. What do you think? Dean grinned and pulled 2 beers from his jacket pocket. I think she picked the wrong man to mess with. They sat on folding chairs outside the shop, watching traffic move along the county road that connected Ravens Hollow to the interstate. Most of the cars belonged to commuters heading home from jobs in bigger towns. People who'd chosen to live in the mountains but work in civilization. Ever think about leaving, Dean asked. Where would I go? Anywhere. You've got skills, money saved up, no ties holding you down. Ewan considered this. He could sell the shop, pack his truck, and drive toward any horizon that appealed to him. Start over in a place where no one knew his history or his mistakes. It was a tempting thought, especially on difficult days when the weight of everything that had happened seemed heavier than usual. Jimmy Torres is building safety systems that'll save lives, he said finally. Can't do that from anywhere else. Jimmy's in college 3 states away. But his work will come back here eventually. New mines, new technology, new ways to keep people safe underground. I want to be here when that happens. Dean nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. They'd both grown up in these mountains, learned their trades in these tunnels, buried friends and family in the local cemetery. Some roots went too deep to transplant. "Kelly's pregnant," Dean announced after finishing his beer. "Congratulations. When's the baby due?" "January. We're hoping for a girl." "Any names picked out?" "Sarah, after Jimmy's mom. She's been like a second mother to Kelly since her parents died." Ewan smiled, thinking about the phone call that morning and the chain of connections that tied their small community together. Sarah Torres would cry when she learned about Dean and Kelly's decision, the same way she'd cried talking about her son's graduation. "That's a good choice," he said. "We want you to be the godfather." The offer caught Ewan off guard. He'd expected to remain on the periphery of his friends' lives, a welcome visitor, but not a central figure in their important moments. "You sure about that?" "Jimmy Torres is alive because of you. Kelly met me because of the flash drive situation. This baby exists because you had the courage to do what was right when everything else was going wrong. That's a lot of responsibility for a godfather. You've handled bigger responsibilities." As autumn turned to winter, Ewan found himself drawn into the expanding circle of Dean and Kelly's preparations for parenthood. He helped Dean build a crib and changing table in their small apartment above the hardware store. He drove Kelly to doctor's appointments when Dean was working double shifts at the new logistics center that had opened where the mine used to be. The logistics center employed half as many people as the mine had, but the work was cleaner and safer. Automated sorting systems and computerized inventory management had replaced the dangerous unpredictability of underground labor. Progress, the mayor called it, though most of the displaced miners weren't convinced. Ewan kept busy with the repair shop, which had become an unofficial gathering place for the town's remaining blue-collar workers. Men who'd spent their lives fixing things with their hands appreciated his straightforward approach to mechanical problems. No unnecessary complications, no inflated prices, no promises he couldn't keep. In December, a young woman named Lisa started bringing her catering truck to the shop on weekday afternoons, selling coffee and sandwiches to Ewan's customers. She was new to town, recently divorced, trying to build a business from nothing more than determination and a used food truck her ex-husband had been forced to give up in their settlement. "You remind me of someone," she told Ewan one afternoon while he worked on the truck's temperamental generator. "Someone good or someone bad? Someone who doesn't quit when things get difficult." They talked while he repaired the generator, discovering shared experiences with divorce and betrayal, mutual appreciation for honest work and simple pleasures. Lisa had been married to a man who'd gambled away their savings and cheated with her best friend. The similarities to Ewan's situation were obvious, but neither of them dwelled on the comparisons. "Different details, same story," Lisa said when he mentioned his ex-wife's affair. "How long did it take to stop hurting?" "About 6 months to stop thinking about it every day. About a year to stop dreaming about revenge. About 2 years to realize I was better off without him. What about trust? Still working on that part." By Christmas, they'd developed an easy friendship built on shared meals and comfortable silences. Lisa would bring dinner to the shop on evenings when Ewan worked late, and he'd help her with truck maintenance and equipment repairs. Nothing romantic, just two people who'd learned to appreciate companionship without complications. The baby arrived on schedule in January, a healthy girl with Dean's dark hair and Kelly's stubborn chin. Sarah Torres flew in from college for the christening, bringing Jimmy with her for his first visit home since graduation. Ewan barely recognized the young man who'd once needed rescuing from a collapsed mine tunnel. Jimmy had filled out, gained confidence, developed the focused intensity of someone who'd found his life's purpose. At the reception after the christening, he cornered Ewan with questions about underground safety systems and emergency response protocols. "I'm designing a new type of breathing apparatus," Jimmy explained, sketching diagrams on napkins. "Longer battery life, better filtration, integrated communication systems. But I need to understand how they'd actually be used in emergency situations." "What do you want to know?" "Everything. How heavy can they be before they become a liability? What kind of conditions do rescuers face? How long do typical emergency operations last?" They talked for 2 hours, Jimmy taking notes, while Ewan described the realities of underground rescue work. The young man's questions were intelligent and practical, demonstrating genuine understanding of the challenges involved. "When will you have a prototype?" Ewan asked. 6 months, maybe less. My professor thinks we can get federal funding for field testing. Test it here when you're ready. I know people who will give you honest feedback. Jimmy's face lit up. Really? You'd help with that. It's what Jimmy Torres's godfather would do. The comment earned a confused look until Ewan explained about baby Sarah's name and his new role in Dean's family. Jimmy grinned and shook his hand with the firm grip of someone who'd learned to appreciate the weight of gratitude. Guess that makes us family, too, in a way. Good families take care of each other, Ewan agreed. Spring brought changes to Ravens Hollow. The logistics center expanded, adding a second shift and 50 new jobs. 2 new restaurants opened downtown, catering to the increased foot traffic. The mayor announced plans for a small technology park, hoping to attract companies that could employ the town's educated young people before they moved away for opportunities elsewhere. Ewan's shop benefited from the economic upturn. Construction companies working on the technology park needed equipment maintenance. The logistics center required repairs to their automated systems. Even the new restaurants needed help with their commercial kitchen equipment. Lisa's catering business grew alongside his, eventually expanding from a single truck to a small storefront with tables and a proper kitchen. She hired 2 part-time employees and started providing meals for business meetings and construction crews. One evening in late April, while they shared dinner at her restaurant after closing time, Lisa made an observation that surprised him. You're different than when we first met. Different how? Lighter. Like you've been carrying something heavy and finally set it down. Ewan thought about this, realizing she was right. The anger that had sustained him through the confrontation with Natalie and Caleb had gradually faded, replaced by something more sustainable and peaceful. Maybe I have set something down, he said. Wow, what was it? The need to be right about everything that went wrong. And now? Now I'm more interested in what goes right. They'd been dancing around their mutual attraction for months, both careful not to rush into anything that might complicate their friendship. But that evening, something shifted. When Lisa walked him to the door, she kissed him softly, testing the waters. Was that okay? She asked. That was perfect. Summer brought Jimmy Torres back to town with his prototype breathing apparatus and a team of graduate students to conduct field testing. The equipment was impressive, lighter than traditional systems, with twice the battery life and crystal-clear communication capabilities. Ewan arranged for demonstrations at the abandoned sections of the old mine, where conditions closely matched real emergency scenarios. Local firefighters, EMTs, and former miners volunteered to test the equipment under controlled but challenging conditions. This could revolutionize underground rescue work, observed Mike Patterson, the fire chief. Response times would improve, communication would be clearer, rescuers could work longer without replacement. Jimmy beamed with pride as he collected feedback and made notes for improvements. His professor, who had driven down from the university to observe the testing, was equally pleased with the results. We'll have federal funding for full production within 6 months, she told Ewan during a break in the testing. Jimmy's design could save hundreds of lives over the next decade. He's a good kid, Ewan replied. He talks about you constantly. Says you taught him that real heroes don't do it for recognition. Someone needed to pull him out of that tunnel. I was the one closest to the situation, and someone needed to believe in his potential after he got out. You were closest to that situation, too. The testing concluded successfully, with unanimous approval from all participants. Jimmy's equipment would be manufactured by a company in Pennsylvania and distributed to fire departments and rescue teams across the region. At the celebration dinner that evening, Jimmy stood up to make a toast. 3 years ago, I made a stupid mistake that nearly cost me my life. Someone risked everything to save me, not because he had to, but because it was the right thing to do. Tonight, we're celebrating technology that will help other people make those same kinds of rescues. He raised his glass toward Ewan. To the man who taught me that being a hero isn't about the moment when everyone's watching. It's about the choice you make when no one would blame you for walking away. The applause was genuine and sustained, coming from people who understood the weight of such choices. Ewan accepted it with the same quiet dignity he'd shown in the mine tunnel, recognizing that some moments required grace rather than deflection. Later, as the evening wound down, Sarah Torres approached him with tears in her eyes. And I need to tell you something I've never said properly. What's that, Sarah? Thank you for giving me back my son. Not just his life, but his purpose. Jimmy would have spent his whole life feeling guilty about that day in the mine, if you hadn't shown him how to turn a mistake into meaning. He did that himself. I just pulled him out of a hole. You pulled him out of more than a hole, Ewan. You pulled him out of the kind of shame that destroys young men. Now he's going to spend his career making sure other mothers don't have to worry about their children the way I worried about mine. The conversation reminded Ewan of his phone call with Sarah 2 years earlier, when she'd explained how Jimmy's rescue had rippled outward into purpose and meaning. Tonight, surrounded by friends and colleagues celebrating the successful testing of life-saving equipment, he could see those ripples continuing to spread. Fall arrived with news that Natalie had been arrested in Philadelphia for credit card fraud and identity theft. According to the newspaper article Dean showed him, she'd been running elaborate scams targeting elderly victims, using fake personas and forged documents to drain their bank accounts. Apparently, she learned some new skills after Caleb died, Dean commented. Or maybe she just went back to her old ones, Ewan replied. The article mentioned that Natalie was facing federal charges and could receive up to 10 years in prison if convicted. Her bail had been set at $250,000, which she couldn't afford. The photograph accompanying the story showed a woman who looked nothing like the confident corporate climber Ewan had once been married to. Feel sorry for her? Dean asked. I feel sorry for her victims. Natalie made her choices with full knowledge of the consequences. Think she'll reach out to you for help? Probably. But my phone number changed 6 months ago. As predicted, letters began arriving at the shop within 2 weeks of Natalie's arrest. Ewan returned them unopened, having no interest in whatever justifications or appeals she might offer. The woman he'd once loved was gone, replaced by someone whose moral compass had been broken beyond repair. Lisa noticed his mood during this period, offering support without asking invasive questions. She'd learned to read his silences, understanding when he needed space to process difficult emotions and when he needed distraction from them. Want to take a trip? She suggested one evening as they closed her restaurant together. Where to? Anywhere that's not here. We could drive to the coast, stay in a bed and breakfast, eat seafood, and walk on the beach. The idea appealed to him more than he'd expected. They'd been building their relationship slowly, testing the strength of their foundation before adding more weight to it. A weekend away would be a natural progression, a chance to see how they function together outside their familiar routines. When? Next weekend? I can get Jennifer to cover the restaurant, and you don't have any major repairs scheduled. They drove to Virginia Beach, staying in a small inn near the oceanfront. The weather was perfect for October, warm enough for comfortable walks, but cool enough to justify bonfires on the beach in the evening. They talked about their past mistakes and future hopes, sharing stories they'd never told anyone else. On their last night, while they sat by a driftwood fire watching waves roll in under the moonlight, Lisa asked the question he'd been expecting. Now, what happens when we go home? What do you want to happen? I want us to keep building whatever this is. Slowly, carefully, but consistently. That sounds perfect to me. They kissed with the salt air around them and the sound of the ocean providing a soundtrack. Both of them finally ready to trust in something good, after so much experience with disappointment. Winter brought baby Sarah's first birthday party, and Jimmy's announcement that his breathing apparatus had received full federal approval for emergency response teams nationwide. Production would begin in January, with the first units shipped to fire departments by spring. We're calling it the Torres Emergency Response System, Jimmy told the assembled crowd at the birthday party. Why Torres? Someone asked. Because the man who inspired it pulled a Torres out of a collapsed mine, Jimmy replied, grinning at his own family name. And because my mom suggested it would sound better than the Greaves Emergency Response System. Everyone laughed, including Ewan, who appreciated both the honor and the humor in Jimmy's decision. What's next for you? Ewan asked Jimmy privately during the party. Graduate school in Colorado, full scholarship plus research funding. I'll be working on automated safety systems for deep mining operations. That's a long way from home. Physical distance, maybe. But everything I'm doing started in that tunnel 3 years ago. In a way, I'll never really leave this place. Spring arrived with news that Natalie had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to multiple fraud charges. The judge had been particularly harsh because of the vulnerability of her elderly victims and the sophisticated nature of her schemes. Ewan felt nothing when Dean shared the news except mild relief that the chapter was finally, definitively closed. Natalie would be in her 40s when she was released. hopefully old enough to have learned something from the consequences of her choices. Any chance she'll try to contact you when she gets out? Lisa asked that evening. I doubt it. She's smart enough to know that ship has sailed. And if she does, then I'll handle it the same way I've handled everything else. One decision at a time, based on what seems right in the moment. Lisa smiled, understanding that this was as close to a declaration of permanent commitment as Ewan was likely to offer. They'd been living together for 6 months, their relationship having evolved naturally from friendship to partnership without dramatic declarations or formal announcements. Summer brought Jimmy's graduation from college and his acceptance to graduate school in Colorado. At his graduation party, he presented Ewan with a framed photograph of the first Torres emergency response system rolling off the production line. Serial number 001, Jimmy explained. It's going to the Ravens Hollow Fire Department, in honor of the place where it all started. They'll put it to good use, Ewan assured him. I know they will. And when they do, they'll be carrying a piece of what you taught me about courage and responsibility. As he prepared to leave for Colorado, Jimmy made one final request. Will you write me letters? Not emails, actual letters. I want to stay connected to home while I'm learning how to change the world. I'll write you letters, Ewan promised. And will you tell me the truth about how things are going here? The good and the bad? I'll tell you the truth. The young man who'd once needed rescuing from a collapsed tunnel shook hands with his rescuer, both of them understanding that their relationship had evolved into something deeper than hero and victim. They were family now, connected by shared experience and mutual respect rather than obligation or gratitude. Fall brought the first letter from Jimmy in Colorado, describing his new research project and the advanced equipment he was learning to use. Ewan replied with news from home. Lisa's restaurant had been featured in a regional magazine. Dean had been promoted to supervisor at the logistics center. Baby Sarah was walking and terrorizing their apartment with boundless energy. The correspondence continued through the changing seasons, creating a written record of small-town life and big-city education, personal growth, and professional development. Jimmy's letters grew more sophisticated as his knowledge expanded, but they never lost the fundamental optimism that had carried him through his recovery from the mine accident. 2 years later, Jimmy returned for Christmas with news that he'd been selected for an internship with a major mining equipment manufacturer. His graduate thesis on automated safety systems had impressed industry leaders, opening doors to opportunities he'd never imagined. I'll be working on the next generation of rescue equipment, he told Ewan during their annual walk through the abandoned sections of the old mine. Systems that can map tunnel collapses in real time, identify trapped workers from their vital signs, coordinate multiple rescue teams simultaneously. Sounds like science fiction. 5 years ago, so did the Torres emergency response system. Technology moves fast when lives are at stake. They stood at the entrance to the tunnel where everything had started, now sealed with concrete and marked with a memorial plaque honoring the miners who'd worked there for over a century. Do you ever regret it? Jimmy asked. The choice to come after me that day? Never, Ewan replied without hesitation. Even knowing everything that happened afterward? The problems with your wife, the confrontation with her boyfriend, all the complications? Especially knowing everything that happened afterward. None of those problems were caused by rescuing you. They were just exposed by it. Jimmy nodded, understanding the distinction between cause and revelation, between action and consequence. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. How doing the right thing doesn't always lead to immediate rewards, but it always leads to the truth. And what have you concluded? That the truth is worth having, even when it hurts. They walked back to town as the sun set behind the mountains. Two men whose lives had been forever intertwined by a moment of crisis and a choice to act with courage. Behind them, the sealed mine entrance stood as a monument to the past and a foundation for the future. Its darkness finally transformed into light. 5 years after that Christmas conversation, Chief Mike Patterson called Ewan with news that the Torres emergency response system had been used to save 3 miners trapped in a collapse in Kentucky. The rescue had taken 12 hours, but all 3 men had survived, thanks to the superior communication and life support capabilities of Jimmy's equipment. Thought you'd want to know, Mike said. Your boy's invention just justified every hour you spent in that tunnel. He's not my boy, Ewan replied. He's his own man. but I'm proud of what he's accomplished. We all are. The whole town's proud of both of you. That evening, Ewan called Jimmy in Colorado to share the news. The young engineer's voice cracked with emotion as he described his feelings about learning that his work had directly saved lives. 3 families got their fathers back because of equipment I designed, Jimmy said. I can't even process how that feels. It feels like purpose, Ewan told him. And it feels like everything terrible that happened was worth it because of this moment. Is that how you felt when you pulled me out? Number. When I pulled you out, I just felt tired and scared and grateful. The purpose came later, when I saw what you did with the life you got back. Their conversation lasted 2 hours, ranging from technical details about the rescue to philosophical questions about responsibility and redemption. By the time they hung up, both men understood that they'd reached a kind of completion. Not an ending, but a fulfillment of the potential that had been created in a moment of darkness years earlier. Summer brought Jimmy's return to Ravens Hollow as doctor. James Torres, newly graduated with a PhD in mining engineering and a job offer from the Federal Mine Safety and Health Administration. He would be designing national safety standards for underground operations, work that would impact every mine in the country. I'm moving back home, he announced at the welcome party Dean and Kelly organized. Washington is only 4 hours away, and I can do most of my research from here. What changed your mind about small-town life? Someone asked. I realized that the best ideas come from understanding real problems, and the real problems are here. You can't design safety systems from an ivory tower. You have to know what it feels like underground. The party lasted until midnight, filled with music and laughter and the kind of genuine celebration that small communities do better than anywhere else. Ewan found himself thinking about circles completing themselves, about choices made in darkness, leading to light, about the way individual acts of courage could ripple outward through time to touch lives that hadn't even been born yet. As the evening wound down, Jimmy approached him with a final surprise. I bought the old mine property, he said quietly, all 200 acres. I'm going to turn it into a training center for emergency responders. That's ambitious. I've got federal funding, corporate sponsors, and university partnerships lined up. The Torres Emergency Response Training Center will teach rescue techniques to firefighters, EMTs, and mine safety teams from across the region. Ewan smiled, recognizing the perfect symmetry of the plan. The place where Jimmy had nearly died would become a place where others learned to save lives. What do you need from me? I need you to be the director of practical training. Teach people what you taught me about making hard choices under pressure. I'm not qualified for that. You're the most qualified person I know. You've been making life and death decisions since before I was born. The offer required serious consideration. Ewan was comfortable with his repair shop, satisfied with his relationship with Lisa, content with the quiet rhythms of small-town life. Taking on Jimmy's project would mean new responsibilities, public visibility, and the challenge of training others to handle emergencies he hoped they'd never face. But it would also mean purpose on a scale he'd never imagined, the chance to multiply his knowledge and experience through dozens of other people who might someday face their own moments of crisis. Give me a week to think about it, he said. Take all the time you need. The center won't open for 2 years, but I can't imagine doing this without you. Lisa wasn't surprised when Ewan told her about Jimmy's offer, and she wasn't surprised when he decided to accept it. It's what you were meant to do, she said simply. Everything that's happened has been preparing you for this. What about the shop? What about us? The shop will survive with a manager, and we'll survive with some changes to our routine. Besides, someone needs to keep you grounded when you start getting too serious about saving the world. They married that fall in a simple ceremony at Lisa's restaurant, surrounded by friends who'd watched their relationship grow from friendship to partnership to love. Jimmy served as best man, while baby Sarah, now a precocious 4-year-old, served as flower girl and entertainment committee. During his wedding toast, Dean observed that Ewan had always been the kind of person who did what needed to be done without waiting for permission or recognition. He pulled Jimmy out of a mine because it was the right thing to do. He exposed corruption because it was the right thing to do. He's marrying Lisa because it's the right thing to do, and because she's smart enough to keep him from getting too full of himself. The laughter that followed carried genuine affection and respect. the sound of a community celebrating one of its own, who'd proven that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they chose courage over comfort. 2 years later, the Torres Emergency Response Training Center opened with a ribbon-cutting ceremony attended by federal officials, industry leaders, and emergency responders from 6 states. The facility included underground training tunnels, simulation equipment, and classrooms where theory met practice under expert instruction. Ewan's first class of students included firefighters from Pittsburgh, EMTs from Charleston, and mine safety inspectors from throughout Appalachia. He taught them rope techniques and breathing management, emergency communication and risk assessment, but mostly he taught them decision-making under pressure. Then the equipment will fail, he told them during their first session in the underground training facility. The plan will change. The situation will be worse than you expected. When that happens, you'll have to make choices based on incomplete information and limited time. The only thing that matters is whether you can live with the consequences of those choices. One student raised her hand. Yo, how do you know if you're making the right choice? You don't, Ewan replied. You make the best choice you can with the information you have, then you live with the results. If someone needs help and you're in a position to provide it, everything else is details. What if you're wrong? Then you're wrong while trying to save someone's life instead of being right while watching them die. I can live with the first outcome. I couldn't live with the second. The training center quickly developed a reputation for excellence, attracting students from across the country and around the world. Ewan found himself teaching techniques he'd learned through necessity to people who might never face the situations that had taught him, but who needed to be prepared just in case. Jimmy's work with federal safety standards continued to evolve, incorporating lessons learned from the training center into national policies that would protect workers for generations to come. The collaboration between practical experience and theoretical knowledge produced innovations that neither could have achieved alone. On the 5th anniversary of the training center's opening, Ewan received a letter from a firefighter in Oregon who'd used techniques learned at the facility to rescue 2 children from a collapsed building during an earthquake. I kept hearing your voice telling me to focus on what I could control instead of worrying about what I couldn't, the firefighter wrote. Those kids are alive today because of what you taught me about making decisions under pressure. Similar letters arrived regularly, creating a record of lives saved by people who'd been trained to handle emergencies with skill and courage. Each letter reminded Ewan that the choice he'd made in a dark tunnel years earlier continued to ripple outward through time and space, touching lives he'd never meet in ways he'd never fully understand. Lisa often found him reading these letters late at night, processing the weight of responsibility and gratitude that came with knowing his actions had multiplied into a legacy of service. Any regrets? She'd ask, echoing Dean's question from years earlier. About which part? Any of it. All of it. Ewan would consider the question seriously, thinking about the marriage that had ended in betrayal, the confrontation that had revealed truth at a painful cost, the choices that had led him from a simple life as a coal miner to a complex role as an educator and mentor. No regrets, he'd always conclude. Just gratitude for the chance to turn one moment of crisis into a lifetime of meaning. 10 years after the mine rescue that started everything, Ewan stood before a new class of emergency responders, preparing to teach them the skills they hoped never to use. Through the classroom window, he could see the memorial plaque marking the entrance to the old mine, its bronze surface weathered but still legible. Before we begin, he told the assembled students, I want you to understand something important. You're not here to become heroes. Heroes are made by circumstances, not training. You're here to become competent, which is much more valuable. A young woman raised her hand. No, what's the difference? Competence means you can do what needs to be done, regardless of how you feel about it. Heroism is what other people call it afterward, if everything works out well. And if it doesn't work out well, then you did everything you could with the knowledge and tools available to you, and that's enough. The outcome isn't always under your control, but your effort always is. He looked around the room at faces that reminded him of his younger self, serious, determined, slightly nervous about the responsibilities they were accepting. My name is Ewan Greaves. 11 years ago, I pulled a 17-year-old kid out of a collapsed mine tunnel not far from here. That kid grew up to design the safety equipment you'll be learning to use, And he built this training center to teach people like you how to save lives under impossible conditions. Ewan paused, letting the weight of that connection settle in their minds. I'm going to teach you everything I know about making good decisions in bad situations. Some of you will never need these skills. Some of you will use them tomorrow. All of you will be better prepared for whatever comes next because you chose to be here. He walked to the equipment locker and began distributing gear, the familiar weight of purpose settling on his shoulders like a well-worn jacket. Let's get started. Outside, the mountains of West Virginia stretched toward distant horizons, their slopes scarred by a century of mining but slowly healing under programs initiated by people who understood that some damage could be repaired. Through patience and careful tending, the sun was setting behind the ridgeline, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that reminded anyone watching that beauty could emerge from the darkest places. In the distance, a train whistle echoed through the valleys, carrying freight toward destinations unknown. The sound had once signaled coal leaving the mountains to power distant cities, but now it carried manufactured goods and consumer products, evidence of an economy that had adapted to changing times without losing its essential character. Jimmy Torres, now director of Federal Mine Safety Standards, was due to arrive that evening for a consultation on new training protocols. He would bring updates from Washington and stories about regulatory battles won and lost, but mostly he would bring the same enthusiasm for meaningful work that had carried him from a collapsed tunnel to national prominence. Dean and Kelly's daughter Sarah, now 11 years old, had expressed interest in engineering as a career path. She'd grown up hearing stories about the man who'd saved Jimmy Torres and the woman who'd built a successful business from a single food truck. Her world was full of examples that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things through persistence and courage. Lisa's restaurant had expanded into catering for corporate events and wedding receptions, employing 15 people and earning recognition from regional food magazines. She'd maintained the simple menu and honest pricing that had built her reputation, proving that success didn't require compromise of fundamental values. These were the real measures of what had grown from a single act of rescue performed by a man who'd simply done what needed to be done. Not the dramatic confrontations or the strategic revenge, but the quiet accumulation of lives improved and purposes discovered and communities strengthened by the belief that individual choices mattered. As darkness settled over the mountains, lights began appearing in windows throughout Ravens Hollow. Families gathering for dinner, students studying for tomorrow's tests, workers returning from shifts that paid the bills and provided the dignity of meaningful labor. Somewhere among those lights, Ewan Greaves finished his first day with a new group of students and drove home to a wife who understood that some responsibilities were worth accepting regardless of their difficulty. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to multiply the impact of choices made with careful thought and sustained courage. The story that had begun in darkness with an act of rescue would continue in light with acts of service, proving that the best revenge against betrayal and corruption was not retaliation but redemption, the patient work of building something better from the ruins of something broken. In the end, that was enough, more than enough.